If you are in the woods and find a tree with red paint, run away immediately. If you are camping in Baxter State Park and you see trees marked with red paint, please pack your bags and leave before it's too late. Let me preface this by saying that I'm not one who believes in cryptids or supernatural stuff. I want to believe that there is a logical explanation for what happened to me and my friend, but for the life of me, I can't find a rational answer. I've been camping since I was a kid, but now I can't find the courage to go back into the wilderness ever again. I'm a pretty experienced camper. I love traveling to different parks and staying out there for 4 to 5 nights at a time. My friend Aaron and I had planned on staying 5 nights in Baxter State Park in Maine. Aaron is also very experienced and has gone with me on countless previous trips. He knows these particular woods better than I do. So when he picked a spot pretty far off from any trails, I didn't question his decision. We chose a spot near a tree that was marked with red spray paint. We planned to leave the site every day to go hiking, so the paint made it an easy landmark that would help us locate our campsite. The campsite was in a small, open field about 30 yards north of the tree with red paint. The first night was completely fine. We hiked out to a nice fishing spot and then headed back to camp when the sun was setting. I distinctly remember passing the painted tree on the way back. Unfortunately, this was the last normal experience I'd have in that forest. Later that night, I woke up to the sound of what seemed like a tree about to fall. I could hear the cracking of branches, followed by loud creaking noises. The odd part was that there was no thud. It's as if the tree never hit the ground. What made it weirder was that the forest still seemed to be rustling. Although now more faint, I could still hear the cracking of branches and lots of commotion. I was still half asleep, so I chalked it up to there just being a large animal making noise. In the morning, we went out on another hike. As we left camp, I glanced around for any recently fallen trees just to be sure. There was nothing. We continued with our day as usual until deciding to cut it short and head back in order to prepare dinner. On the way back, we couldn't spot the tree with red paint. It was odd, but we still managed to make our way back to camp based on memory. Aaron was more confused by the absence of the tree than I was. He kept going on about how he was certain the path he had us on would have taken us right by the tree. To confirm, he walked back over to the location of the tree, but it was nowhere to be seen. When he told me this, I thought he must have missed it, so I also investigated. Sure enough, the tree wasn't anywhere to be seen. I trust our spatial awareness, and I wholeheartedly believe we were in the exact spot where the tree should have been. I remembered the sounds from the previous night having come from the direction of the tree, so I thought that maybe it was the one that had fallen over. However, after scanning the area, there was no sign of a fallen tree. It's as if the tree had just completely vanished. Although we were confused, we didn't keep looking for much longer and returned to the campsite and went to bed. Later, in the middle of the night, I was once again awoken by the same sounds. It sounded like the forest was moving. The sound of trees breaking and snapping was unnaturally loud. It was much louder than small branches snapping. It was like a whole trunk was being broken in two. I still told myself that it was just a large animal, most likely a bear. I should have investigated it to be sure, but it sounded distant, and I didn't want to risk an encounter with an animal. That morning, we went hiking to another fishing spot nearby. This is when things got really strange. On our hike back, we took the main trail and walked past an older couple who were also out camping. They saw our fishing gear and asked if we caught anything. We started having a pretty casual conversation, But the whole tone shifted when the husband brought up hearing trees fall in the night. It was their first night camping, and I told him that we had been hearing loud noises in the night for multiple days now. I asked him if he was able to find the fallen trees, but he said they couldn't find anything. Then I asked him what direction he heard it from. "It was right over there, near that tree with red paint on it," he said as he pointed off toward the distant tree line. Aaron and I looked at each other with confusion and an uneasy feeling. It's very possible that multiple trees had been marked with paint in these woods. Maybe there was logging scheduled soon. Despite all logical conclusions, both of us were put on edge by the mention of a tree with red paint. All four of us walked over to look for a fallen tree, but I was more interested in finding this tree with red paint. When we got closer, I asked the man where the tree with red paint was. In a confused tone, he said, "It should be right here." "That's strange. Maybe I'm mistaken." His wife chimed in. "No, it was definitely here. It was pretty easy to spot because of the bright red." Now things felt really off. What are the chances that two different groups spot a tree with red paint, and then both trees seem to vanish into thin air? We continued on our hike to the fishing spot. On the way, all we could talk about was the tree with red paint. It was such a strange coincidence, and we couldn't figure out a logical explanation. Despite this, we tried to forget about it and focus on fishing and the beautiful scenery. We didn't want these strange events to ruin the vibe of the trip. The day came to an end, and I was once again awoken by loud rustling in the forest. I ignored it and went back to bed. When morning arrived, Aaron and I decided to take a break from hiking and spend the day at camp. While eating lunch, Aaron got up to go take a piss. He walked over to the tree line, which was close by. It was maybe 20 yards away at most. One thing I feel I need to stress was that he had walked in the opposite direction of where we had initially spotted the tree with red paint. I didn't think anything of it and continued eating with my back facing the direction where Aaron was peeing. In a shocked voice, Aaron shouted to me, "I found the tree with red paint! It's over here!" Immediately after he said this, the forest began to rumble again. It was the same sounds I had been hearing every night. I could hear loud snaps of branches and a deafening creaking noise, the kind you hear from large trees swaying in heavy winds. I couldn't see Aaron anymore, and I became concerned, so I started calling out his name. My guess was that the tree couldn't have been far from the tree line, so if he walked into the woods to investigate it, he only would have walked a few feet. He was definitely close by, given the fact that I could hear him. However, as I called out his name, I didn't get a response. I began to panic. I thought maybe a bear or something had attacked him in the woods, and that's what caused the loud noises coming from the forest. But I didn't hear any screaming or cries for help. It's like he vanished. I ran over to where he was, and I couldn't find him anywhere. By now, the loud crashing of branches had reduced to a distant rustling of leaves. I continued calling out his name, but there was nothing. It didn't make sense. How could he go from within earshot to completely gone in less than 30 seconds? My heart was racing. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something was terribly wrong. I began to sprint through the forest, following the sound of distant commotion in the trees. Unfortunately, the dense woods slowed me down, and eventually the forest returned to silence. I ran back to camp, all while still screaming out for Aaron. I went to investigate the spot where I last heard him. I thought that if something happened, maybe I could track him by tracing his steps. I walked back to the tree line and found his canteen, which he had laid next to him on the ground. I even found the puddle of pee where he had been doing his business. But that's about it. His footprints went only a couple more feet before coming to an abrupt stop. What made it stranger was that I couldn't even find the tree with red paint. It's a very bright red and is easy to spot, so if he spotted it while peeing, it must be extremely close by. I circled the area multiple times but found nothing. No tree, no Aaron. In all the confusion, my heart was racing, but I tried to stay calm and called 911. I didn't sleep for the next 72 hours. A search and rescue operation started just 30 minutes after I dialed 911. I tried to help as much as I could. I gave a description of Aaron and described where I last saw him and what had occurred just moments before his disappearance. I felt crazy for doing it, but I even brought up the tree and tried to stress that I believed it had something to do with his disappearance. As I expected, the police disregarded the whole tree thing. Under normal circumstances, I would have as well, but something felt deeply wrong in my soul. I don't know what it was, but I know that tree had something to do with Aaron's disappearance. To make matters even worse, the couple we had spoken to was also reported missing. Apparently, police estimate that they disappeared just a few hours before Aaron did. They were only reported missing after they didn't show up to a guided hiking session they had scheduled that day. How fucking strange is that? The couple also vanished without a trace. As far as I know, they were the only other people who had a strange encounter with a tree with red paint, and now they are missing as well. After multiple nights, I had to get some sleep. I was at the point of exhaustion. I packed mine and Aaron's things and decided to get a motel room. I wanted to be nearby the forest as the search continued. As of writing this, it's been just over a month since he went missing. So far, all the rescue team has found is one of Aaron's shoes. It was discovered about 15 miles from where he had vanished. Nothing has been recovered from the older couple. I'm still at the motel. I can't find it in me to leave Aaron in those woods. I feel so distraught and angry. I honestly just want an answer as to what happened. None of it makes sense. I can't find any logical explanation as to how or why he vanished. But all I know is that there is something dark in that forest. I know that somehow that tree is connected to all of this. It tears me up inside knowing that Aaron may never come back, and I'll have no rational explanation as to why this happened to him. All I can do now is warn others from experiencing the same fate. If you're out in the woods and you find a tree with red paint, please, for the love of God, turn around and go home. My son's teacher has been giving him some strange homework. I have recently had to move to another city due to work. My family and I, which consists of me, my wife, and my 9-year-old son, Dylan, were suddenly uprooted from our quiet life and had to move to a busier city, which none of us were used to. My wife had to find another job in the city, and my son had to leave friends behind and start at a new school, which I hoped would all be worth it for the sizable pay rise that I was receiving. We have been moved in to our new house for about a month now, and everyone seems to be adjusting to the new lifestyle that we now have. My wife has found a new job, which she enjoys, and she has made a number of new friends there. My son has also settled in well to the new school. He is in the 3rd grade and, due to being in a busier city, is in a larger class than he is used to. I don't think he minds though. He has already made a few friends that have helped him adjust to the new school. His teacher, Mrs. Wagner, was a younger woman, around 30, who Dylan seemed to really like. He would always come home and tell me and my wife all about the fun he had at school and the fun lessons that Mrs. Wagner would teach. I had only met her the once, when I dropped Dylan off at school on the first day, and as far as I could tell, she was a very nice lady. Every night, Dylan would come home with different homework that he would have to complete before school the next day. I'm not a massive fan of homework, but it seemed like the homework that Mrs. Wagner always set was quite simple tasks that could easily be completed in a night. One night, Dylan had to ask a parent find out what their parents did for work and ask 3 questions about their job. And another night, he had to research their favorite animal and find out 3 interesting things about it. It was always simple tasks like that, or it was simple worksheets that Dylan could complete in half an hour or so. Every night, I would ask Dylan what his homework was for that night, and then I would help him with it if he needed help. That's when I noticed the homework becoming a little bit strange. One night, in Dylan's 3rd week of being in the new class, he came home looking upset. I asked him when he entered the kitchen what was wrong, and he told me that everything was okay. I then asked him what his homework was for that night, and he told me that he didn't have any for that night. This was surprising because he had some sort of homework task every single night he had been in Mrs. Wagner's class. So it was strange that he suddenly didn't. Dylan then left the kitchen and went into his room, shutting the door behind himself. He didn't usually close the door, but I thought that he must have wanted some privacy. I could tell, though, that something was wrong, but he didn't want to tell me. Dylan spent most of the night in his room, apart from dinner time, when me and my wife told him he had to sit at the dinner table with us. He seemed to be in a better mood during dinner and was fairly talkative and making jokes like he normally did. After dinner, though, he went back to his room and closed the door. We decided to let him stay in there for a while, but after an hour or 2, I went in to see him and let him know that it was time to go to bed. I walked down to his room, opened the door, and when I looked inside, I saw that he had already fallen asleep over his workbook. I quietly walked over to him to gently wake him up and move him to his bed, but that's when I saw it. The homework task that was set for that night. The title that was written in Dylan's workbook was, "Would I miss my parents if I no longer lived with them?" At first I was taken aback. This was a very weird task to set for a group of 9 and 10-year-olds. I didn't really know how to react to this. I continued to read, though, to see what else he had written. He had written, "I would miss both my mom and dad very much. I love them both a lot, and they help me with everything. I love spending dinner time with them. But I would probably love someone else as much as them if I had to. Like you were saying today, Mrs. Wagner." When I read the final sentence, I felt chills down my spine. I would probably love someone else as much as them if I had to. The words struck me like a brick to the face. What had Mrs. Wagner been telling my son? What was the purpose of telling him these things? I decided, probably stupidly, not to tell my wife about what I had found. She would worry, and she probably had a right to worry, but I didn't want to concern her. I decided that I would instead confront Mrs. Wagner tomorrow and ask her about this strange homework task. The next day, I took Dylan's school like I normally do, except this time, I got out and walked up to the classroom with him. I saw Mrs. Wagner alone in the classroom as I entered the room, and she greeted me with a smile. "Hey, how are you?" she said as I entered the classroom. "How is Dylan settling in?" I answered that he was settling in well, but I did have 1 or 2 concerns. She asked what they were, and so I explained. "I was just curious about the homework you set yesterday. The one about how much they would miss their parents. I am just concerned because it is a very strange and confronting thing to ask a group of 3rd graders. I also noticed that Dylan wrote that he might have to love someone else if he had to, like you told him. I would really like you to explain that, I asked her, quite bluntly. Oh, that, she replied as she let out a slight laugh. Yesterday, I was teaching about how parents love and protect their kids, but also how that there are also other people that would be there to help them if they need it. I wasn't satisfied with this answer and was about to question her further when suddenly a large group of school children entered the classroom. They were all walking in 2 rows. They all greeted Mrs. Wagner and greeted her one by one. They seemed very well behaved, almost too well behaved. I then saw Dylan take a seat next to one of the students who was staring to the front of the classroom with their arms crossed. At the entrance of the rest of the class, Dylan's behavior seemed to change. He seemed to sit up a bit straighter, and his eyes widened as he began staring at the rest of the class. I looked around and noticed that all of the students were staring at the same spot. All their eyes were pointed at Mrs. Wagner. Something didn't feel right, but I knew that Dylan needed to stay at school, and this was probably some sort of morning routine they had. I left, still with concerns about the homework, but I decided to wait and see if any other strange homework would be set before I would take this matter further. I decided that I would pick Dylan up from school though, and so I left work a little bit early and drove over to the school. The school bell rang, and soon all of the students were dismissed and starting to come out of the school gate. Most of the kids came running and screaming out of the gate, apart from Mrs. Wagner's class. They all walked out in a line, walking in time. This disturbed me. I had never seen a group of students so well behaved, especially even after the school bell had rung. Dylan walked over to the car and hopped in. He didn't say anything and sat in his seat, staring straight forward. I asked him if he was okay, and he just replied with the word yes. I drove him home in silence, and when we got home and inside, Dylan went straight to his room and closed the door. I knew something was definitely wrong, but I didn't know what. I decided to leave him alone until my wife got home, and I would tell her everything that had been going on. She got home about half an hour later, and I sat her down and explained everything that had been going on. She sat and listened, and started to look more and more worried with every word I said. Maybe I should go and talk to him. He might like that, she said, once I had finished explaining everything. I agreed, and so she went into his room, and I waited out in the lounge room for them to finish talking to each other. 15 minutes later, Dylan walked out of his room and into the lounge room. He was holding a small workbook, and he said, "Can you help me with my homework, Dad?" "Of course, come and show me what you need help with," I replied. He held out the notebook, and I took it out of his hands and read the homework task for tonight. Written on the top line of the page was one task: research the best way to inject your parents with anesthetic. I barely finished reading the sentence when I felt the sharp pain in my neck, and I looked down and saw the needle sticking out of the side of my neck. Dylan was holding the other end of the needle, a blank stare on his face. Everything started to go black, and the last thing I remember seeing is Dylan staring down at me as I lay on the floor. I don't know how long I was out, but I was awoken by my wife screaming and crying. I woke up, startled, as she continued to scream. "He's gone! Dylan's gone!" she kept screaming. I looked up at her, and the first thing I saw was the small pinprick that was on the side of her neck. She had been injected too. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to find my son. I tried my best to get up, but I think the drug hadn't properly worn off yet, because I still couldn't move properly. I could move my arms, so I managed to get my phone out of my pocket and dial the police. I explained to them what had happened, and they said that they would send officers out and would begin looking for Dylan. I then noticed that it was already 9 in the morning, and so I decided to ring the school and see if Dylan had gone there. I dialed, and a lady answered the phone. I asked if she had seen Dylan from Mrs. Wagner's class. "No, I am very sorry, but we haven't seen him today. In fact, we haven't seen anyone from Mrs. Wagner's class today. They are all absent." Which is very odd, because Mrs. Wagner hasn't shown up for work either today, the lady on the phone said. I hung up and sat in silence for a moment. My wife had heard what the lady said, so she also just sat there in total silence. That was all 3 weeks ago, and Dylan is still missing, along with Mrs. Wagner and the rest of his classmates. All the parents of the kids in Dylan's class have the same story. They were injected with something by their own children, and when they woke up, their child was gone. No one knows where they went, but we all had the same questions. Were they all together? Was Mrs. Wagner with them? Was this all planned? Why were all the students acting so strange in the day leading up to this? Were they hypnotized or drugged? Or maybe something even more sinister was happening?